He's taken away our self-government. All right, and he went so far as to, in New York, he banished the house that they had there. And he said, you no longer have a representative form of government, we're taking over your government. All right, this is their sole complaint. And when you look through all of these, they said, you're taking away our self-government, and we don't approve. And then the final one, he has dissolved the representative houses repeatedly. All right, sovereignty of the people is foundational. It's the foundational principle to our nation. Second one, sovereignty of the states. At what time do we have a federal government? When's the first time we had one? It was March 4th, 1791, I believe, is when we called together the Congress under the Constitution. That was the first time we ever had a federal government. All right, now we had a Congress under the Articles of Confederation, but there was no federal government. In fact, there wasn't, because the states said we're not going to allow a central body to hold this much power, especially during war. They said we are the sovereign, our states are the sovereign, and those states up in the north, they might want to fight a war, but South Carolina was late to joining the war because they said we don't want to get a part in that. We're our own sovereign state, we're not really having as many problems as they are, and we don't want to fight our the strongest army in the world. We don't want to be a part of that. Now, of course, they came into that war for independence, and we won that war. But again, it's the sovereignty of the states. They would not come together under that. So the first time we had a federal government was in 1791. The individual colonies were individual states. They were governing bodies. The colonies, these united colonies, have right not to be free and independent states. States back then, their definition of states, it's molded over time for us. Back then, states meant nation. They have absolved from all alliance with the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state. Let's see if I can circle that right there. The state of Great Britain. All right, so we got these states over here, and we got the state of Great Britain. They're equal. England is the equivalent of North Carolina, or South Carolina, or Georgia, or New York. They're equivalent. All right, and this is displayed perfectly when we see the Treaty of Paris. That ended the war, the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence. King George signed a treaty with 13 different countries. And if you go and you read that treaty, each of those countries are depicted, listed by name in the treaty. It said, we are at peace with these countries, all 13 colonies. All right? Individual states, individual countries. We didn't have a federal government. All right? The way that my American government teacher put it, he said, the Constitution faces the federal government. Right? It doesn't face the states, it faces the federal government. The Constitution was created by the states to form a federal government and to depict that federal government. And the minuscule rights that they have were depicted in that. Federalist 45, James Madison, he said, the rights of the federal government are few and defined, the rights of the states are indefinite and unnumbered. All right? Sovereignty of the states, foundational principle. So what's that last part? I'm going to pause here, because I think this is brilliant, especially for the Convention of States cause. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of constitutional powers is in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. It doesn't get any more specific than that. All right, we have the ability. We, the states, created the federal government. If their distribution or modification of the powers is in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment. George Washington, this was his farewell address in 1796, I believe. It was his first farewell address. All right, so history of the convention. How many times have we gotten together? The Stamp Act Congress, this was called in 1765. We got together and we said, here's all the taxes they're passing on us, what's our response? And that's when we sent our first letter pleading with King George to give us the right of representation. So that's the first time we got together in the states. Intercontinental committees, this was started by Samuel Adams. He sent letters between the different governors of the different states saying, here's what's going on here, what's going on there, how can we help you, what do we need to do up here? The states working together. All right, first and second Continental Congress, the first one was called in 73. I believe it was 73, and the second one was called in 76. Obviously, we had the Declaration come out of 76, our Declaration of Rights, our Declaration of Freedom. All right, intercontinental committees, the states getting together, individual nations coming together, forming a compact so that we can get the same cause, get the same, we're towards the same goal, so we're going to come together on this issue. All right, Mount Vernon Convention. This arose out of a land dispute between Virginia and Maryland, I believe. Delaware. Virginia and Delaware. They, the Potomac River ran right between them, and they said, well, this is my part, and Virginia said, no, that's my part. They had this big dispute, and the Articles of Confederation didn't give Congress the power to determine what land was. And so they got together. George Washington said, let's come together and let's talk about it. Well, it turns out Virginia's delegates were the only ones to show up. And they said, well, we can't let this go to side. So we're going to have another convention next year, and that's the Annapolis Convention. And we're going to invite everybody, all 13 states. We're going to talk about this. Only 5 states showed up, and they talked about these issues, and they said, this is really helpful. We can determine these issues, but we don't have enough jurisdiction to make conclusive decisions on this land dispute. So James Madison said, let's not let this Annapolis Convention go to waste. Let's call another convention next summer in Philadelphia, and we're going to bring it together to revise the Articles of Confederation so that we can have a nation of states, of countries, that work together and can function together properly. And so that's when we had the Constitutional Convention, and that's where we got our Constitution, and that's the first time we had a federal government, was in that instance. All right, the last one I want to mention is the Bill of Rights. Virginia was the one. Under the Constitution, they said, we are only going to pass a Constitution if you allow for a Bill of Rights. And so Congress convened under the Constitution, and they weren't proposing the amendments fast enough. And so Virginia said, nope, we're going to call a convention under Article 5. That's actually where we get the name Convention of States, that's what Virginia called it. We're going to have a convention of states to get these Bill of Rights. Congress got the word, and James Madison introduced the 12 original Bill of Rights, and then we got that down to 10, and we passed those out, and the states ratified them. However, the Bill of Rights, that's where Convention of States gets its name, under Article 5. All right, those are a few examples. There are several more. If you have questions, by all means, please ask. These principles right here depicted in these 3 resources is where I got most of my information. I highly suggest you search these out. There is much political truth in all of these. First one is Dave Barton. It's a YouTube video. Just YouTube it. It is fabulous. He goes through and he talks about principles of American exceptionalism. And that might sound like he's very patriotic or whatever, but he goes through and he shows how God was central to this and the principles that we were founded on. All right, the second one is easy as pie. You can Google this anywhere. He's done this same speech all over the United States. It's brilliant. He talks economics in terms that a 5-year-old can understand. And it is very enlightening. And then the final one is Cleon Skousen, 5,000-Year Leap. He created 27 principles of government, the principles of our government. And he goes through in the book and he introduces those principles. And then he shows what resources the Founding Fathers used to gain those principles. And a very comprehensive view of what we are founded upon, where we're going, and why it was a certain way. Fabulous resources. I highly suggest you look at all of those. So what were the founders' intents? Let's recap real quick. Limited 3-branch government. All right, we bring the power together, then we got to divide that power so that we can have the freedom that we need. All of the powers to the states, the 9th and 10th Amendments depict that perfectly. All right, when the people fear the government, there is tyranny, and when the government fears the people, there is liberty. That's the basic founding principle. Self-government, government of the states. All right, we come together, we cede a tiny amount of power so that we can work together. Everything else is to the states. And then finally, self-government. Each, and you and I, the individual citizens, are part of our government. We are responsible for everything that happens. Self-government in the United States. Founding principles. Here are the 9th and 10th Amendments. I'm going to try to keep this around 20 minutes, so I've got to move on here. Just look up the Constitution. Read the Constitution, read the Declaration, read Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty to Death speech, and you're on your way to freedom. You read those documents, it's brilliant. They're simple, they're easy to understand, and you can understand all of these things that I'm talking about right here. So again, the Constitution, the Declaration, and Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech. Very informative on this issue. So what do we have now? I think we all know what we have now. We've got a massive government that's taken over our lives, and there have been a lot of ramifications because of what they've done. The first one is unconstitutional lawmaking, overregulation, spending and debt, and this quote here. So the French did the same thing that we did, or they tried to. They declared that they had rights, and then they tried to create a new government from that. And so they were in contact with Thomas Jefferson, and they were saying, what do we need to do so that we can have the same success that you've had? What do we need to do? And so in the second letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote, he wrote this, and he was talking about the judiciary. He said, it should be remembered as an axiom of eternal truth in politics that whatever power in any government is independent, it is absolute also. Right? if he doesn't have accountability, who's to tell them they can't do something? Who's to hold them in check? Right? As an axiom of eternal truth, this is what happens. All right? You see this depicted in every single form of our three-branch government. All right? Eternal truth. When they don't have accountability, they are independent, and they have complete control over that issue. All right, judicial branch, executive agencies. The judicial branch has twisted the Constitution to mean things that it was never intended to mean, that encroach amazingly. And amazingly does not have a good connotation in that sense. Into our aspects, the book I suggest is Men in Black by Mark Levin. He talks about all of those issues, the interstate commerce, how they've twisted that to mean anything that affects interstate commerce, the First Amendment, establishment of religion. They flipped that on its head, completely meaning things that it was never meant to mean. The executive branch, we all know of the executive orders that are being passed that are crippling our economy. They're crippling those things, and it's not right on the right or the left. It's not right for Obama. It's not right for Trump. Now, we put this in this situation. We've had this form of government. We've shifted from those principles, and so what Trump is doing, I agree with. It's not right constitutionally. Just because we agree with it doesn't make it right. Right? So I agree with what he's doing again, but he's overreaching his power. We didn't elect a king. We elected a president. Right? There's a distinction there. And the president's powers are minute and defined. Executive agencies, accountability, they have absolute power again. Back to that principle. Overregulation, it's made us 72% poor. Right? We all know how this plays out. You guys probably know it a little better than me because I've never owned my own business or held a job or paid taxes. Yes, I'm only 16. But, you guys know how that figures out. The amount of laws that have increased. The starting date right here is 1976. We've increased this in just the last 40 years. All right? We're spinning out of control. We've got to take those principles, we've got to reinstate them, we've got to get back to what we were founded upon. Spending and debt, I'm not worried about the deficit. It's big enough to take care of itself. 140 trillion national debt, this was mentioned in the video, right? Unfunded liabilities, $140 trillion is an incredible amount of money. I can't even grasp how much money that is, right? That is way too much to be in debt for a nation. Unconscious burden on future generations. The borrower is servant to the lender. I got a graph here. The biggest thing we spend on is health. Now, I'm not sure why the federal government is worried about health. That's not part of their defined powers in the Constitution. That would be a state right power. But we do spend over a quarter of our budget on health, the national budget. This is the federal budget. The next one is Social Security. Now, I know we all pay into that, but it sure seems like we never see it again. And why is 25%, another quarter, of our budget spent on welfare? Right? That's not the job of the federal government. The federal government's job is never to regulate our individual lives and to pay people. And then the other biggest one is national defense. Anyway, I found this, again, informative. This video that I'm about to show you, I'll make sure the speaker's on this time. Ken Ivory is a representative from Utah. They had a legislative simulation. They got together a convention of states last fall. All delegates from all 50 states showed up, and they had this mock convention. It was pretty cool. I know David was there. It was neat to see that. So we had this mock convention. Ken Ivory actually was voted president of that convention. Anyway, he's before his committee here, and he's describing convention of states to his committee, and he does a magnificent job. So I'm going to share this with you, and then we'll wrap up right after this.
Mr. Speaker, I remember I was first called into a church leadership position, and I was excited. I wanted to help my neighbors, and I was excited that we would do great things. And when problems would come up, as problems do, I would come up with these creative solutions. We could do this, or we could do that, or we could try this to solve that problem. And the leader would just sit back and finally would say, Brother Ivory, I have an idea. Why don't we check the handbook? Why don't we check the handbook? Representatives, we have the handbook. We have the handbook. Men that we believe were raised up by God, who said by divine providence they established a more perfect union with the Constitution. And in that handbook it says that we have the power. We, this body, state legislators, we have the constitutional power to maintain the system. Think of your first official act. First official act, I remember standing right there. And I remember raising my hand and solemnly swearing that I would uphold and defend the handbook. And I wondered what power I had as a state representative to uphold and defend the Constitution. It's right there. It's right there. In fact, George Washington, the father of the country, said, if in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers is ever in any particular wrong. We've heard a lot of discussion about how the distribution and modification of the constitutional powers is in almost every particular wrong. He said, if in the opinion of the people they're ever in any particular wrong, let it be changed by an amendment in the way the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation. Don't just do it, don't just let the federal government do it. That's how free government is destroyed. I agree with my good colleague from Salt Lake. Governing by executive order is not appropriate on the right or the left. That's how free government is destroyed. The Supreme Court acting like the supreme being is not okay on the right or the left. That's how free government is destroyed. In order to secure our liberty, that we could flourish, that we could create our highest order. We're the only government in the world that says we're endowed by a creator with unalienable rights, life, liberty, property. And with those, we can create in a godlike manner new songs, new buildings, new businesses. And we created, we're secured in those things. And they said to create that protection, we first divide government. We have to divide government, and we have to limit government. And Madison, in the very first Congress, introducing the very first amendment to the Constitution under Article 5, said the state legislatures will jealously and closely watch the operations of this national government, and the state legislatures will be able to resist with more effect every assumption of power better than any power on earth can do. Because the state legislatures are the sure guardians of the people's liberty. If we fail to act, how do we answer to those that the good representative presenting the bill put life, fortune, sacred honor on the line? We can redeclare independence right now with a document, not a musket or a pitchfork. We can reestablish the divisions and limits of power right now without a war and a battle under the rule of law. Those that complain this is too dangerous, I got an email that said, using the Constitution is the worst thing since sin. Triple exclamation point. That's the hyperbole that's been out there. The worst thing since sin is to use the Constitution. I think not. The handbook is the answer. It's right there. How should we suppose that divine providence that established this Constitution will continue to bless and favor us if we don't use what He gave us? It's like a drowning man praying and the boat comes. They say, no, I'll wait for God. Here's the life preserver. I'll wait for God. This is the liberty preserver right here. In 1967, there was a group, in fact, the same group that is opposing this today. There's a group that was pushing the Liberty Amendments, and the Liberty Amendments would have banned the United States from engaging in business. It would have eliminated the 16th Amendment. It would have eliminated foreign engagement in the United States. And they presented this bill on the floor in the Utah legislature. And I've got a news article that says Governor Rampton said that Ezra Taft Benson, who was the former Secretary of Agriculture, prominent leader in the United States. Now, I don't know what the rules were in 1967. If Mel Brown were still in the body, he could tell us what it was like back then. But it says that Ezra Taft Benson was allowed, when the debate began, Ezra Taft Benson was permitted the privilege of the floor in the legislature to speak in favor of the Liberty Amendment and afterwards sat on the floor. Throughout the debate, Rampton says, making himself at home. Justice Scalia said the founders inserted this alternative method of obtaining constitutional amendments because they knew Congress would be unwilling to give attention to many issues that people are concerned with, particularly those involving restrictions on the federal government's own power. They foresaw that, and they provided the convention remedy. If the only way to get to a convention is to take the minimal risk, then it's a reasonable one. Otherwise, we cede all power to Congress. Representatives, it's in the handbook. It's in the handbook. And we swore the oath, and so decide or don't decide, we'll be accountable for what we do because we are constitutional actors. We are the sure guardians of the people's liberty. And as Washington said, if in the opinion of the people, it's in any particular wrong, use the handbook. I encourage your support.
Now there's a lot. Yeah. You got a lot of brilliant stuff in there. A lot of brilliant stuff. The part that I like to mention is when he said, we can use the Constitution here. We don't have to fight a battle. We don't have to grab a pitchfork or a musket, right? All right, you hear revolution tossed around as an idea. In my opinion, I think that'd be the destruction of America. That's my dogmatic opinion. But we don't have to use that. Right? We don't have to take that risk because, as he said, we can use the handbook. We can use the Constitution in the way that the Constitution allows, amending the Constitution. That's all it's about, is using the provisions that we've been given as American citizens to preserve the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So what's the root of the problem? The people have neglected our responsibility. We've left it. We've left our responsibility, and in that void, the government's taken over, right? Every government in history has gone through this cycle. All right, we bloom, and we flourish, and we fade. And at the very end, you get these tyrannical governments. All right, we've got the opportunity to disallow that from happening in the United States and preserving the liberty for us. All right, my kids, 40 years from now, I want the United States to be around then. Right, I want to be able to have the liberties, not only for my lifetime, but for my children's lifetime. All right, I want them to be there for the next 100 years, or the next 200 years. All right, we have this ability. We've been given this unique and special place to live in. All right, it wasn't our choice. I didn't choose who my parents were or where I was born. I've been given this opportunity. All right, and it's my job to pass that opportunity on to the next generation. That's why I do it. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but test a man's character, give him power. I mention this because a lot is said, the feds, Washington, those evil people who sit in those chairs and destroy the rule of law. I don't view it that way. Right? I'm convinced that I would make the same exact decisions if I had the same mental protocol, if I had the same circumstances, if I had the same moral judgment. I'm certain I would make the same exact decisions.